Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents No Freedom Shrieker, The Civil War Letters of Union Soldier Charles Freeman Biddlecom. Edited by Katherine M. Aldridge. Narrated by Joanna Perrin and Johnny Heller. Biddlecom Lapham, Family History. The following details about Biddlecom and Lapham ancestry were obtained from handwritten records saved by family members. Dates and names were confirmed and relevant details added through various credible sources. Biddlecom. Non omnis moriam. I shall not fully die. Thomas Biddlecom. 1673 to 1735. Immigrated to Warwick Neck, Rhode Island, from Devonshire, England. Married Martha Sheldon Mathewson. Thomas Biddlecom II. Born in Rhode Island in 1726. First married to Sarah Burlingame, born 1736, Cranston, Rhode Island, until her death, 1756, and then married her sister, Mary Burlingame, 1738 to 1835. According to a list of men who commenced service during the Revolutionary War, dated January 9, 1777, Thomas was a private in Captain Thomas Rice's company of Colonel John Waterman's regiment, and Captain Millard's company and Captain William Clark's company of Colonel Benjamin Simmons' regiment. Thomas was captured and held prisoner on an English prison ship at Halifax, Nova Scotia. After the war, Thomas moved from Rhode Island to Adams, Hoosac, Massachusetts. In 1786, Thomas sold 25 acres of land in Hoosac, Massachusetts, and moved to Deerfield, Oneida County, New York. He died in 1813 and was buried in the Old Whitney Cemetery, Utica, New York. Thomas Biddlecom III. Born in 1769. Married in 1793 to Sarah Reed, 1770 to 1837. Sarah was the daughter of Daniel Reed and Eleanor Southwick. Eleanor was the daughter of Daniel and Ruth Shove. Daniel was the son of Lawrence and Cassandra Southwick, who have been memorialized in American history as committed Quakers who were fined, tortured, and imprisoned, their children almost sold into slavery in Salem, Massachusetts in 1658, for not adopting the Puritan religious standards. According to the 1790 census, Thomas lived in Adams, Berkshire, Massachusetts, with his wife and 3 children. They had 9 children in all. In 1786, Thomas sold his 25 acres in Massachusetts and traveled west toward Macedon, New York, in a series of moves across western New York. He died in October 1861 and was buried in the Macedon Village Cemetery. Children: Joab Stafford, Otis, Susan, David, Daniel. Joab Stafford Biddlecom, born 1803. Married in 1833, Olivia Mathewson, 1808 to 1885, a descendant of Bostonian Lincolnshire immigrants who came in the ship Lion to Boston in 1631. Joab owned a farm in Phelps, New York, with his father and brother before moving to Macedon, New York. There he held the position of Macedon town supervisor, grocer, and mill owner. Joab holds an 1870 United States patent, number 102,649, for an improvement in a clapboard gauge. Died in 1897 and was buried in the Macedon Village Cemetery. Children: Charles Freeman. Sarah married Addison Gates, and Laura married Stephen Bosworth Pound, mother of Roscoe Pound, world-famous legal historian and dean of Harvard Law School. Charles Freeman Biddlecom, born February 5, 1832, in Phelps, New York. Married Esther Aldridge Lapham in 1854. Educated at the Macedon Academy and Clinton Liberal Institute. Children: Bayard Thomas, 1855 to 1922. Stafford, 1856 to 1872. Isabel Bell, 1860 to 1861. Emma B. Sweet, 1862 to 1923, women's rights activist. None of Charles and Esther Biddlecom's children bore any descendants. Lapham. Amor, honor, et Justitia. John Lapham, born about 1610 in Tenterden, Kent County, England. 25 years later he is found in Scituate, Massachusetts, married to Mary, daughter of Nathaniel Tilden. John Lapham, born 1635 in North Moulton, Devonshire, England. Settled in Providence, Rhode Island. Married Mary Mann, 1640 to 1710. In Rhode Island, John was admitted and served as a freeman, deputy to the General Court and constable. In 1676, after his house was burned by Indians during King Philip's War, John fled to Newport, Rhode Island, and then to Dartmouth, Massachusetts, where he participated in building the town's first Friends Meeting House and lived until his death in 1710. John Lapham, born 1677 in Providence, Rhode Island. In 1700 he married Mary Russell, born 1683, and moved to Dartmouth, Massachusetts, where he died in 1734. 14 children. Joshua Lapham, 1722 to 1799, married Hannah Mary Sherman, February 3, 1747. Children: Ruth Jinks, Daniel, Lydia Rogers, David, Orpha, Abraham, Phoebe, Nathan, Vermont Laphams. Asa, Nehemiah, swallowed a watermelon seed and died at 4 years old. Hannah, born 1773, married Humphrey Anthony. Hannah and her husband acquired her father's homestead, the historic site in Adams, Massachusetts, called The Hive. Their son, Daniel Anthony, was the father of woman's suffrage activist Susan B. Anthony. Abraham Lapham, 1755 to 1836. Born in Smithfield, Rhode Island, with his first wife, Esther Aldridge, 1756 to 1822, moved to East Hoosac, Massachusetts, and finally settled in Macedon, New York, in 1789. Abraham's brother Asa married Esther's sister, Hannah Aldridge. Later, Asa and Esther both died, and Abraham married Hannah, his sister-in-law. Consequently, he was turned out of the Farmington Quaker meeting. Children: Deborah, Ira, David, Abraham, Stephen, Lydia, John, Esther, William Savory, Daniel. Daniel Lapham, 1784 to 1842. Married Martha Jane Gage. Dismissed from the Society of Friends, that is, the Quaker congregation, in 1775 by Thomas Lapham and George Comstock of East Hoosac, because he did not marry of the same order. Children: Esther, Cornelia Scott, 1830 to 1874. Daniel, 1832, a ripe old age. David Mortimer, 1834 to 1867. Stephen, 1839 to 1866. Mary Ann, 1836 to 1855. Esther Aldrich Lapham, 1827 to 1904. Born in Farmington, New York. Educated at Macedon Academy and taught at that school for 13 terms. Married in 1854, Charles Freeman Biddlecom. Children: Bayard Thomas, 1855 to 1922. Stafford, 1856 to 1872. Isabel Bell, 1860 to 1861. Emma B. Sweet, 1862 to 1923. Chapter 1. Writing Charlie. Nearly a century and a half of accumulated clutter, dust, and debris was left behind in 5 historic barns, under piles of straw, behind stairwells, at the bottom of grain bins, when Wixom Farm was sold for the first time. Shortly before the deed was signed over to me, the owners held an auction and thinned out the collectibles that had been acquired by the 5 generations of relatives who considered the farm partly their own. Distant cousins and neighbors arrived to snatch up the most valuable antiques and still useful tools, but left behind most of the everyday items that had long been retired from duty. Among the disorder of unwanted knickknacks, broken tools, scraps of wood, and critter nests that I inherited, I discovered a dusty, red, cardboard liquor box. On its lid, scrawled in crayon, was written Cousin Emma's Old Letters. Working farms accrue fresh clutter as new projects begin. The parts and pieces of finished or failed projects are packed away, shoved into corners, and eventually forgotten. With its sheltered piles of debris tucked into almost every corner, my weathered old farm bore strong evidence of this long-standing reality. Curious about the letters, but too busy with the tasks required of a 130-acre farm and 4 kids, I put the box aside and set to work bringing order to the more obvious projects calling for attention around the property. Once the farm was brought to an almost acceptable level of disorder, with the anticipation of discovering a lost treasure and an uncanny knowing that opening the cardboard liquor box would be immensely time-consuming, I peeled the crackling tape off of the musty-smelling lid, opened its flaps, and uncovered a mess of papers, crammed and jumbled together. Inside, newspaper clippings, daguerreotypes, calling cards, and dozens of documents that at some point in time were deemed too important to throw away, but not valuable enough to occupy precious space inside the house. Of the hundreds of fragile pieces of paper, a handful had been neatly folded, tucked securely back into their envelopes, and stacked. The rest were in a tangle. The ink and pencil had faded, but nothing appeared seriously damaged, except for the small square cut from the corner of every envelope where its stamp had been removed. Everything in the box appeared intact. Grabbing up a sheet from the top of the mess, I squinted to make out the sweeping script. June 22nd, and a bright morning. Johnny Rebs are very much irritated this morning. The bullets are whistling over and around right merrily, whispering in our ears the admonition of, "Keep down, heads, for death is in the air." Several bullets have struck our earthwork, and 2 men of the 95th New York have mustered out of the government service and been taken home by the Father of Mercies. Immediately I felt the heavy burden of responsibility that I had just unwittingly taken on by recognizing that the humble cardboard box contained numerous letters written by a Civil War soldier. So masterly did this writer express his mind that the Blue Ridge Mountains were clearly drawn into my view, and his pains of hunger and illness were palpable. I gingerly lifted another page from the pile and spent the ensuing 2 years acquainting myself with its writer. From records found inside the box, I learned that the soldier's name was Charles Freeman Biddlecom, hereafter referred to as Charlie, and that he was mustered into the 28th Regiment New York State Volunteer Infantry, Company E, on May 22, 1861. As did tens of thousands of American Civil War soldiers, Charlie began writing letters home almost as soon as he walked out his door. Using any hard surface that would pass as stable enough, a hat-bill, slab of wood, a knee, on whatever scrap of mostly clean blank paper that they could find, with any mostly working pencil or pen that could be begged, borrowed, or stolen, Civil War soldiers wrote letters. Whether passing the slow-moving time in a tent or a dog hut in camp, waiting in the woods for a rotation on picket duty, or hunkered down in the mud at the bottom of a rifle pit, men poured their emotions onto paper. To the best of their ability, they scratched out thoughts phonetically, drew sketches when words would not do, and painted images with words if they were unable to draw. Those who were illiterate often hired official letter writers or tent mates to scribe their words. If conditions were rainy or frigid, the smoke in the tent too stifling, mosquitoes too bothersome, or when the bullets flying overhead caused too much of a distraction, there might be an apology for the shortness or sloppiness of a letter, but still, that letter was written. An article printed in the Boston Journal in 1861 stated that the Washington Post Office processed 45,000 letters per day. So, what makes Charlie's letters so special? The United States National Archive and Records Administration in Washington, D.C., preserves important documents such as the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, ancestry records, as well as the military service records for each individual soldier who served the United States government. Yet, however thorough these records may be, they offer only a short-sighted glimpse into the emotions and concerns, the whys and hows, of the individuals to whom they are connected. From records obtained through the National Archives, I learned that Charles F. Biddlecom was 5 feet 6 inches tall, though sometimes he was measured to be 2 inches taller than that. I have yet to discover a single photo of Charlie, but from his military service record I learned that he had a dark complexion, black hair, black eyes, and weighed $150. Charlie was 29 when he volunteered for service in the spring of 1861, older than the average volunteer, but in no other way a standout. If reviewed strictly from the records, Charlie's military career merged inconspicuously with the tens of thousands of men who responded to Lincoln's call for volunteers. The National Archives list the facts and figures, but they paint a flat and colorless portrait of the lives and incidents recorded. During a lifetime, each one of us becomes a number, part of a statistic in some way, but in the shadow of each fact and figure, there is a story, one that usually goes untold. Each time Charlie was marked absent from roll call, there is listed the explanation, absent due to illness. Data from the muster roll is confirmed in Charlie's letters and tells part of the story, but fails to give an account of the weeks of pain and fatigue he tolerated, all the while still performing his work before finally seeking medical attention and being relieved from duty. Endured by all the troops, the days of near starvation, weeks of short rations, exposure to harsh elements, freezing temperatures, wind, rain, heat, sun, not to mention the ever-gnawing homesickness and fear, are of no account in the official records of each soldier. The National Archives preserve and keep records of individual soldiers, but the facts and numbers alone fail to accurately reflect the son, brother, lover, or father to whom each set of data belongs. Before reading Charlie's letters, I thought of the Civil War era with a general nostalgia, its rough edges polished down, cartoon-like images portraying serious, clean-cut white men wearing traditional blue uniforms with shiny brass buttons, slinging rifles with sparkling bayonets attached. I imagined a soldier always to be valiant, and his actions during war just. But as I read Charlie's stories of duty, camp life, combat, and his feelings about society and politics, my image of a polished Civil War soldier changed. The battle reenactments I watched as a kid now seem carnival-like by comparison. I recall being taught as a young student that North battled South, and thus ended slavery. The causes and outcomes of the conflict were skimmed over. We studied the heroic military leaders made immortal for chaperoning soldiers into the most famous battles: Ulysses S. Grant, George Meade, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, Jeb Stuart, and visited cemeteries filled with row upon row of stark white headstones marking the graves of soldiers who perished during our nation's horrific battle for human rights. Before reading Charlie's personal account, Thoughts Born in the Midst of Combat, it was easy to distance myself from the realities of war, and even to dismiss a soldier's life or death as a dry statistic, merely one of the unavoidable costs of winning a necessary war, and rarely delineating between the soldier as a tool and the same as a person. Finding Charlie and reading his experience changed my view completely. Since beginning this project, I have met numerous passionate, hard-working, and deserving amateur and professional historians who all but drool when I relay my story of finding the letters. The decision to transcribe Charlie's letters was, for me, simple. Every step has felt like an undeserved privilege. That I would preserve history and resurrect Charlie's voice was never a question. As Linda, the librarian at the Nebraska State Historical Society, said, it would be almost criminal not to preserve them. However, the decision to publish, rather than archive and keep the letters private, still is, more complicated. In letter after letter, Charlie admonished, "Don't show my letters to Ed Brown or anyone else. Give my kind regards to my family, but don't show my letters. So, burn this up or put it away where no one will find it. The letters that I write are not intended for publication, and I do not wish the learned ladies of Macedon to find out what a poor grammarian I am, nor what a soft head I am." Charlie dislikes the plan of having his inferior productions published to any except the family. You see my dilemma. I wonder sometimes if the letters were hidden in the barn at Charlie's behest. Charlie wrote boldly, as if he meant to impact an audience, but was at the same time humble enough to acknowledge his shortcomings, grammatical and emotional, and did not want his flaws broadcast. He was not the type to tout his opinions publicly, but wrote with such clarity and purpose that I suspect he must have known the power his words had to make an impression on more than the one person to whom he wrote. His reasons for insisting that his wife Esther keep certain letters private varied, but I argue against myself that none of those reasons exist today. Still, every time I come across his request for privacy, my stomach lurches. Consolation comes only from perceiving that Charlie was a good-hearted fellow who would have been glad to know that so long after his flesh has turned to dust, his sentiments, as he stated on December 2nd, 1864, will interest you enough to pay for the paper and ink. After 2.5 years enduring the eye-squinting tedium of organizing thousands of scraps of paper, unscrambling tangled lines of faded script, interpreting outdated word uses, decoding misspellings, and intuiting implied sentence breaks, Charlie's letters are finally preserved and his voice returned. The Spencerian script, so full of tiny, graceful loops spelling out the 19th century language, at first appeared to me as a foreign language, but now reads comfortably. I would recognize his handwriting anywhere. Charlie was fairly well educated, but still, the original letters are akin to a 60,000-word run-on sentence. Charlie did not use punctuation liberally. His spelling was inconsistent. There are a few unreadable words and lines where the pages have been folded, ripped, or soiled, a handful of mistakes, and a sentence here and there that simply does not make any sense. His script varied slightly depending on his mood or the circumstances, if he was sitting at a table or hunkered down in a dirt pit. But all the letters are of the same hand. Charlie wrote his own letters. Letters that have been penned by another person, a tent-mate or a professional letter writer, typically begin with the clue, "I take my pen in hand." I slightly edited the transcriptions to present the collection in a manner that makes them easier to follow and understand than are the originals. In editing, I retained all of Charlie's sentence structure and the order of his words, but changed spelling and punctuation to be modern and consistent. I corrected the few blatant mistakes, such as repeated words, but left his grammatical style alone. The headings have all been reformatted to read in a uniform fashion, but the details contained therein, location and military unit, are just as Charlie wrote them. A handful of lines were obscured by folds, and too worn or faded to make out. Incomplete thoughts or sentences, due to torn paper or missing pages, and words that were indecipherable, I simply left out. Throughout the process of transcribing and editing, my utmost goal has been to return to Charlie his voice, as untainted as possible, while yet being digestible to modern readers. Chapter 2. Tracing Charlie. After the last of Charlie's letters had been transcribed, I downloaded the file onto a tiny USB flash drive, put it in my pocket, and drove to Kinko's. I expected to feel overjoyed. For months I had been anticipating the moment when I could sit back to read the printed letters in chronological order, minus the glare of the computer screen, the double and triple checking of each typed transcription against Charlie's letters, and the detailed sorting and filing. So much organizing, editing, and scrutinizing had gone into reassembling the collection that though I knew the contents of each page, I had not yet read through the letters uninterrupted. Surprisingly, instead of feeling satisfied or even slightly relieved about reaching such a milestone, I, often accused of being stoic and overly pragmatic, cried, sniffled, hiccuped, and wept all the way to town. My unexpected tears gushed with the stark and somehow new realization that I would likely never discover another new anecdote of Charlie's again. In my attempt to revive his voice, in a way, I had shared his anticipation, fear, boredom, and longing. It often felt like I was right there beside him, witnessing his religion floundering, his character changing, and even his writing skill improving. On the way to the printer, I mourned the idea that our time together had ended. Every last word about his soldiering experience had been read. There was no more. It was over. I had listened to his thoughts and words, recorded his voice, and now all that he had left behind was situated on a small cold peg of metal in the linty pocket of my blue jeans. While working on Charlie's letters, there were times that I was so drawn into his life that I began to think, write, and speak about him in the present tense. My husband, and occasional editor, has also fallen prey to these lapses in reality and overlooked obvious shifts in my writing from past to present tense. Even my children have been guilty, frequently walking through the door after school asking, "How is Charlie today?" in the same way they might ask about a friend or neighbor. Aware of the fine line between passion and insanity, I will not admit the number of times that my emotions were caught off guard, and I was shaken from Charlie's presence with the painful realization that my hopes for him in the specific circumstance of whatever letter I happened to be reading were futile. With a startle, I would remember that he has long been gone. The battle is over. Charlie's first printing day was like one of those moments. What I did not yet realize on that teary drive to Kinko's was that I barely knew Charlie. Even though I had indeed read his last words, I had not come close to untangling their full meaning. Freedom, fairness, and advocacy. The atmosphere in Farmington and Macedon, New York. On delicate paper bound with silk thread into a booklet titled The Young Ladies' Commission, scripted by the young editress, Mary Ann Lapham, Esther's youngest sister, there is this description of their hometown in 1854, the year Charlie and Esther married. What a pleasant place Macedon is, with the most splendid sidewalks, elegant crossings, and beautiful bridges that you ever saw or heard of. It contains the most magnificent gardens imaginable. It really is a feast to look upon. The splendid vegetables arranged so tastily, with here and there a burdock standing out in bold relief, showing by their appearance that their owners do not join in that too common prejudice that flowers are useless, but intersperse the useful with the ornamental. It is so pleasant. Let us take a walk where we can not only converse on these beauties, but can also view them. We will first pass up Main Street. Do you see that lofty, two-story edifice? That is Macedon Academy, one of the finest institutions in the world. How finely it is situated on that commanding eminence, and how beautifully the grounds are laid out. All but a few of the letters that I found in the cardboard box were directed to Esther and mailed to the post offices in Farmington or Macedon, neighboring towns in western New York. During the time it took me to sort, scan, and transcribe his letters, I became as familiar with Charlie's language and well-worn phrases — my family refers to them as Charlieisms — as I am with each snag of my favorite wool sweater, but had gained only a limited comprehension of the place and period in which they were written. Throughout the process of transcribing Charlie's letters, my goal has been to revive and share his voice as genuinely as possible. So to prevent tainting his expressions or my perception of them with post-war opinion, I did not venture outside of the box to gather more information until after I had finished transcribing each letter. I avoided reading the well-known Civil War memoirs, novels, and history books, suggested and even given to me by well-meaning friends, because I wanted to first hear Charlie's version of the story. Consequently, my understanding of Charlie and of the time and place...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?